Hello, environmental science students. We're going to do our first lecture for biodiversity, chapter 17, by the way, CH17. All right. And in this particular lecture, we're going to relate the geologic timeline and mass extinctions to the current trend in biodiversity loss, something we touched on during class today. We will define what we mean when we say biodiversity, and we'll describe the importance to humans, actually, specifically, of maintaining biodiversity. The accompanying reading is pages 376 through 379. All of the stuff on the geologic timeline is not in the textbook, at least not in this section. Anywho, geologic timeline. So the way geologists have constructed Earth's history is using what you see over here in this diagram. It's a system of what they call eons, eras, periods, and epochs, and then there's like sub-ages and stuff in there. But for us, we'll say that, eons. So these are our two main eons. We have the Phanerozoic, right, which is essentially the time period during which we've got complex or advanced life forms. So vertebrates and fish and stuff like that, all the way up through humans and so on. The Precambrian, as shown here, there was life, at least during part of the Precambrian, although it was fairly simple and limited to like those Archean life forms that we talked about way back in, I think it was chapter 3 even. All right. Then we've got our eras, right? So like the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic here. The Mesozoic, one of the more famous era names, just because that was the time of the dinosaurs, so the eons are separated into eras. The eras are separated into periods. So we got, again, in the Mesozoic, we got the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous periods. So if you were dino nuts, like my son was, he learned all about which dinosaurs were alive during which periods. Jurassic Park, for example, the name of that book and movie by Michael Crichton, is named after the Jurassic period, although most of the dinosaurs were actually Cretaceous dinosaurs. So it's sort of a misnomer. It should have been Cretaceous Park, but whatever. And then we separate the periods into epochs, right? And then the epoch during which we live is what we call the Holocene. Okay? Anyways, now, this is not exactly accurate in terms of the scale of this, because, first of all, the Precambrian period is much longer than, or the Precambrian eon is much, much longer than the Phanerozoic. So if we look at this one, we can kind of look at its sense of scale here. So here is the Phanerozoic eon, all right, as it compares to the Precambrian eon. Okay? So you can see it's roughly between 80 and 90% of Earth's history was really kind of boring when it came to biological systems, right? So we had a long period in Earth's history. Like I said, between 80 and 90% of Earth's history was devoid of complex life forms, complex or advanced life forms, okay? And we can kind of zoom in on this Phanerozoic eon into the various eras, which would be the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Cenozoic is our modern era. Mesozoic was the time of the dinosaurs. Paleozoic predates the dinosaurs. And then we can kind of zoom in on the tertiary part of the Cenozoic era, and we can see the various times. The Holocene takes up just a kind of tiny little sliver of that overall time period. So part of what you need to understand is, in terms of the age of the Earth, the human existence is fairly inconsequential on the terms of how long we've actually been here compared to how long the Earth's actually been around. Okay? The other thing to point out here is why are we split up into these various eons versus eras and periods? Like what decided when one started and one began? And mostly it's global changes, right? The Earth has gone through lots of different changes. We've had Pangea, which connected and then split apart, which caused climate changes, which then affects life forms and natural selection works in different ways as the globe changes, and we get different forms of life over time. And then we have sometimes really big changes that happen abruptly, right, that led to those mass extinctions we talked about. So most of these ages or periods and eras, etc., denote some sort of major global change, either in the flora, fauna, and the topography of the earth, the chemistry of the oceans, whatever that caused those changes. They do denote changes, right? And most of these changes, again, put in your mind in terms of scale, take a really, really long time. So slow changes, right, do result in life changing. But life's able to keep up without major die-offs or extinctions, right? Those mass extinctions you guys read about were the result of abrupt changes, sometimes caused by extraterrestrial objects like an asteroid or something like that. Sometimes they were internal forces of really abrupt volcanic activity, changing the chemistry, releasing what's called hydrogen sulfide and poisoning our oceans, and life had trouble. But slow changes, moderate changes, life is pretty well able to find within its variation the adaptations necessary to cope with it. Abrupt changes, life doesn't do so well with. Okay? But anyways, that kind of leads us in to our talk here. So about 10,000 years ago, roughly, we began what's called the Holocene time period, okay? And during the Holocene, this is essentially where the retreat of the last ice age occurs, okay? Human civilization, agriculture, people started living in one spot, and cities began growing, okay, because of the onset of things like agriculture. And it's mostly after the rapid extinction of our really what they call large megafauna, which would be like our mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and stuff like that, happened around the beginning of the Holocene epoch, okay? Now, scientists, ecologists, population ecologists are saying that we've actually moved into a new epoch that they're calling the Anthropocene, okay? Anthro, as you guys recall, is a prefix meaning referring to humans, right? So the reason they argue that is humans have gone from, just going through a period of thriving in the Holocene epoch to becoming the dominant force of global change, right? So we're essentially creating a new and changed Earth, much like something like an asteroid might have done in the past. Humans are so dramatically changing things that we are the, not a, but the dominant force of global change, right? And we've touched on that a little bit already in the terms of when we were talking about the, climate change, for example, and how we're actually changing the chemistry of the atmosphere, changing the chemistry of the oceans, causing coral bleaching, for example, okay? And so it's hypothesized that we're in the midst of a sixth mass extinction because we're losing species at an estimated rate of about 100 times the rate of the natural background extinction rate. Okay, and that's because, as nature has told us, or geologic history has told us, life is not very good at coping with abrupt changes. Slow changes we can manage. Abrupt changes are tough on living systems, and those mass extinctions occur during abrupt change. All right, oops, sorry about that. Bam. So when we use the term biological diversity or biodiversity, we talked about this in class a little bit, but we're talking about the number, variety, and variability of Earth's organisms. So it involves genetic diversity. So as you can look at these various types of corn, right, we have a variety of characteristics within that one species. Okay, species richness, which is a term we've used several times throughout the year, which is just the number of different species. Okay, but all of this, maintaining that, also entails variation in our habitat types, right? So we have the possibility of different niches. Okay, so when we say biological diversity or biodiversity, we're actually talking about all three of these components. many people assume that biodiversity is just simply species richness, which is not comprehensive enough. Okay, we need to account for not just how many species we have, but also the genetic variation within that species, which makes them better able to cope with changes over time, right? And then we need lots of different types of habitats to support those various niches. All right. So, you know, it was brought up. Well, why do we need organisms? All right. So, you know, there's the obvious ones. We need certain organisms for food, just for basic survival. Like, you know, we need trees, for example, for timber. Okay. So organisms provide food and clothing and shelter, right? We need our pollinators so that we can actually grow food with relatively good yields, right? We rely on various organisms for antibiotics and various medicines, right? We need certain organisms for things like nitrogen fixation, right? So soil bacteria plays a really vital role in maintaining soil quality, you know? And those are maybe some of the more obvious reasons, okay? But there's probably lots of untapped resources that we haven't even thought of yet. Okay, and so allowing biodiversity to decline essentially slowly chips away at some of those other potential resources that maybe we don't even know about yet. Okay, now we also talked in class today, and I just want to drive this point home, about this systems perspective, right? Ecosystems are systems, and so we have lots of biotic and abiotic components that are interacting and function as a whole. And it's not all, we're not always able to tell just how profound one organism is within its ecosystem. All right? We do know that we need functional ecosystems because we need clean air, clean water, and fertile soil. And we talked about wetlands, for example, and how unbeknownst to us, they were providing such valuable ecosystem services. But we just thought they were kind of wastelands for the longest time. We didn't know that they controlled floods and kept our water clean until we started taking them out. Okay? So likewise with some of these organisms, we may think that one organism is kind of a nuisance, like mosquitoes, for example. But what would really happen if we got rid of mosquitoes? Do we really think we understand ecosystems enough to think that we could just do without mosquitoes? You know, if you think you really know the answer to that, you're probably not understanding the real complexity that biological systems have. Okay, and so just how profound of an impact is a question mark. We don't know. We just don't know. All right. Now, scientific importance of genetic diversity. All right. We will talk more about genetic engineering. Genetically modified foods is kind of a hot button issue, really important politically right now. What that process entails. I will say that if we're going to make use of genetic engineering, which has some huge promise for advancements in agriculture and medicine, we have to rely on genes that currently exist. Okay? And if we reduce our genetic diversity, we're reducing our ability to tap into that as a potential resource for things like curing diseases and curing the world of famine, for example, and our ability to grow food in climates where maybe that are changing. Okay? Agricultural plants with desired characteristics. There might be foods out there that are actually nutritionally superior. You know, we've locked ourselves into some staple crops like rice and wheat and corn. Maybe there's varieties that we can grow that are far superior in terms of our ability to digest them, in terms of the nutrition we can get from them, protein levels. Some of that might come from genetic engineering. Some of it just might be plants out there that already exist that we just haven't really tapped into yet. Okay? So it's important to protect diversity for that potential. Okay? You know, we talked about medicines and antibiotics, but the rosy periwinkle, for example, there's a derivative that provides not protection, but helps to treat certain types of cancer. The drug they used to use to treat AIDS and HIV, AZT, was a derivative of the aquatic sponge. Okay, so, you know, industrial importance, oils and lubricants, perfumes, dyes, paper, lumber, poison. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we rely on organisms for. So I hope I've kind of created a picture that, you know, despite the fact that it may seem like, you know, well, really all I need to survive is some crops and maybe a cow or two and some pigs and chickens. All the rest of the things on Earth could probably go away and I'd be fine. And it shows a pretty limited perspective on how the Earth actually works. Okay? That's going to wrap things up for us right now. Again, we want to make sure we understand that, yes, maintaining biodiversity is important. Right? I'm going to ask you guys to create arguments for that near the end of the chapter. You know, you got a little taste of that today. You know what we mean when we say biodiversity, and kind of understanding the current loss of biodiversity is similar to, and what's scary, is similar to past mass extinctions. Although past mass extinctions have been more of what you'd call you know, things like an asteroid or severe volcanic activity or really abrupt climate change from one of those causes. Humans now are not a, but the dominant force of global change. And life doesn't do well with abrupt changes. Peace.